He sat across from me at the desk I had chosen, in the office I had built, and slid a paper across with a number on it, and I looked at that number, looked at him, and said, "This is minimum wage," while my phone had been recording for 47 minutes. I want to tell you about the specific sound a man makes when he realizes the conversation he thought he was controlling has been recording itself for 47 minutes. It is not a loud sound. It is actually very quiet. It is the sound of someone's confidence leaving the room before they do, a slight intake of breath, a stillness, and then the particular quality of silence that follows when a person understands that every word they just said with such comfortable certainty is now evidence. Faisal Rahman made that sound on a Thursday afternoon in September, sitting across from me in the office I had built, at the desk I had chosen, in the building I had helped make worth something, and I want to tell you everything that led to that Thursday before I tell you what happened after it. I started Karimi Logistics in a single room above a hardware store in 2009. Not metaphorically. Literally a single room, one desk, one chair, one laptop that took 4 minutes to start up, and a business plan I had written on weekends over 6 months while working a full-time job that paid just enough to keep the plan alive until the plan could pay for itself. I was 26 years old and I had no investors and no family money and no safety net of any kind, and I had a specific understanding of the freight and logistics industry that I had developed over 5 years of working inside it at every level from warehouse floor to dispatch coordinator, and I believed, with the specific stubborn clarity that you need to believe something when nobody else does yet, that I could build something real. 14 years. I want you to sit with that number for a moment before we go further. 14 years is not a story you can summarize quickly. It is a decade and 4 years of early mornings and missed occasions and decisions made at midnight and problems solved before anyone else knew they existed, and relationships built one by one with the patience of someone who understands that a logistics business runs on trust and trust runs on time. 14 years of payroll met and contracts won and staff hired and trained and retained and a reputation built in an industry where reputation is the only currency that compounds. By 2023, Karimi Logistics had 42 employees. We had contracts with 6 regional distributors and 2 national retailers. We had a fleet. We had systems I had designed and refined over years. We had, by any external measure, become something that had not existed when I started it and that existed now entirely because of the 14 years of work I had put into making it exist. And then my health became a conversation. I do not want to spend too long on the health part because the health part is personal and also because it is not the center of this story, it is just the door through which the center of this story walked. What I will say is that in early 2022 I had a diagnosis that required attention, and that attention required time, and the time required me to be less present in the business than I had always been, and less present in a business you have run by force of personality and direct oversight for 13 years creates a specific kind of vulnerability that people who want to take advantage of you can identify from a distance. I brought in an operations manager, a man named Sohail who had good references and a confident manner and who I trusted more than I should have trusted him on the timeline I trusted him on, which is a mistake I made and which I own. Sohail ran the day-to-day for 8 months while I managed my health, and I checked in regularly and the numbers looked acceptable, and I told myself the business was in safe hands. Sohail was in contact with Faisal Rahman during those 8 months. I did not know this at the time. I found out later, much later, after everything else had happened and I was in a position to look back at the sequence of events with a full picture rather than the partial one I had been working with. Sohail had been feeding Faisal information about the business during those 8 months. Not officially. Not in any way that showed up in any document. In the informal way that information moves when someone has decided to position themselves advantageously before a transaction occurs. Faisal Rahman approached me in October 2022 with an offer to buy the business. He was a man in his late 50s who had made money in commercial property and was, he told me, looking to diversify into logistics. He presented himself as someone who understood operational businesses, who respected what had been built, who was looking for a going concern with strong fundamentals that he could grow with the right continued leadership. The right continued leadership. He used that phrase more than once. He said he wanted me to stay on. He said my knowledge of the business was irreplaceable. He said the transition would be seamless because I would remain in place as general manager with full operational authority and a salary that reflected my contribution. I should have had a lawyer review every word of that before I believed any of it. I had a lawyer review the sale documents. I did not have a lawyer review the employment terms with the same scrutiny because I was managing my health and I was tired, and I trusted the verbal assurances of a man who had given me no reason to trust him beyond the fact that he had said trustworthy things with a confident face. I sold Karimi Logistics in December 2022. The price was fair. I will give him that. The price was a fair assessment of what the business was worth, and I received it, and I will not pretend otherwise. What was not fair was what came after the price. Faisal took possession in January 2023. For the first 3 months he was largely invisible. He came in once a week, asked questions, reviewed reports, made no significant changes. I ran the business exactly as I had always run it, and the business performed exactly as it had always performed, and I told myself the arrangement was working. In April, he moved his son into the office. His son Bilal was 24 years old and had a business degree and the specific confidence of a young man who has been told his entire life that his father's achievements are transferable to him through proximity. He did not have logistics experience. He did not have management experience. He had a degree and a father who owned the business, and he was placed in an office next to mine with the title of Deputy Operations Director, and I was told, by Faisal, that Bilal would be shadowing me to learn the business. I understood what shadowing meant in this context. I had not been born understanding it, but I understood it now. I said nothing. I showed Bilal how things worked. I answered his questions, which were sometimes intelligent and sometimes revealed the full distance between a business degree and the actual operation of a logistics company, and I was professional and thorough because the 42 people who worked at Karimi Logistics, who were still there because of the reputation and systems and relationships I had built, deserved professionalism and thoroughness regardless of what was happening around them. By June, Bilal was making decisions without consulting me. Small ones at first. Vendor choices. Scheduling adjustments. The kind of decisions that are consequential in logistics in the way that small decisions are always consequential in systems where everything is connected to everything else. I flagged the issues. Faisal listened with the polite attention of someone who is waiting for you to finish so he can tell you the decision stands. In August, we lost a contract. A national retailer we had held for 6 years, one of the anchor accounts I had spent 2 years building before it became reliable revenue. They left because of service failures that had accumulated over 3 months of Bilal's decision-making. The client called me personally, which told me that the relationship had always been with me rather than with the business entity, and they said they were sorry and that they had valued our partnership and that they hoped things would improve. I thanked them and ended the call and sat in my office for a while. I called my lawyer that afternoon. Not about the contract. About my employment situation. I had been thinking about this call for 2 months, and I made it because I had started to understand the shape of what was happening and I needed to know what my position was before the shape became fully visible. My lawyer reviewed my employment contract and told me what I had been afraid she would tell me, which was that the contract I had signed in December, the one I had reviewed but not reviewed with sufficient paranoia, had terms that were more favorable to the employer than I had appreciated at the time of signing. My salary was protected for a 12-month period. The 12-month period ended in December 2023. After December, the contract was reviewable. It was September 2023 when I had this conversation. I had 3 months of protection left. I asked my lawyer what I should do. She said, document everything. Every conversation, every decision, every instance of being overruled or undermined. If they are building toward a demotion or a constructive dismissal, you want a record that predates whatever they are about to do. I said, what if they just cut my salary? She said, they would have to give you notice and a right to respond under the contract terms. They would have to have a meeting. It would have to be formal. I said, and if I record that meeting? She said, know your jurisdiction's laws on recording consent. I knew my jurisdiction's laws. I had looked them up 2 weeks earlier. I went back to the office. I kept documenting. I kept my phone charged. The meeting was called for a Thursday in September. Faisal's assistant sent me a calendar invitation with the title Compensation Review, which was either breathtakingly blunt or simply the confidence of a man who did not believe I would do anything about whatever he was planning to do. I arrived 4 minutes early. I set my phone on the table with the screen down and the recording application running. I sat down. I folded my hands. I waited. Faisal came in and sat across from me, and he had a folder which he placed on the desk with the deliberateness of someone who has rehearsed this, and he said, Samira, I want to talk about the direction of the company and your role going forward. I said, of course. He talked for a while about the business environment and cost pressures and the need to restructure, and I listened and I watched his face and I noted that he did not make eye contact in the sustained way that people make eye contact when they believe what they are saying. He was reciting. He had prepared this and he was delivering it, and he was not entirely comfortable in the delivery, which told me that some part of him understood that what he was doing was not entirely defensible. He opened the folder. He said, we are proposing a new compensation structure for your role. He slid a paper across the desk. I looked at the paper. I looked at the number on the paper. I looked up at him. He said, I know this is a significant adjustment, but the role has changed and we feel the new structure reflects the current scope more accurately. I said, this is minimum wage. He said, the role has been significantly reduced in scope since Bilal has taken on operational responsibilities. I said, Bilal has been in this building for 5 months. He said, he's developed quickly. I said, he cost us the Meridian contract in August. He said, that was a mutual business decision. I said, I was not consulted on it. He said, "You were informed." I looked at him. I said, "I built this business for 14 years. I trained your son for 5 months. And you are offering me minimum wage." He said, "If the new compensation structure doesn't work for you, we completely understand and we would support a transition." There it was. The sentence underneath all the other sentences. "If you don't accept minimum wage, we will support you leaving." Which was not support. Which was the mechanism of constructive dismissal dressed in the language of mutual understanding. I said, "I see." He said, "I hope you understand this is purely a business decision." I said, "I understand completely." I picked up my phone from the table. I stopped the recording. I said, "I'll need some time to consider." He said, "Of course, take the week." I stood up. I shook his hand, because I was going to be professional until the last possible moment and then passed it. I walked out of the office. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and I sent the audio file to 3 places. My email. My lawyer. A cloud backup I had set up specifically for this purpose 2 weeks ago. Then I called my lawyer. She answered on the second ring. I said, "I have 47 minutes of audio." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll clear my afternoon." My lawyer's name is Aisha Malik, and she is the kind of lawyer who listens to a 47-minute recording with complete stillness and then sets down her pen and says, with the calm of someone who has just understood the full dimensions of a situation, "This is considerably more than I expected." We listened to it together in her office on the Friday afternoon after the Thursday meeting. She stopped it in several places and made notes and asked me questions about context, and I answered them with the documentation I had been compiling since August, the emails and the meeting records and the written communications that showed the pattern of what had been done over 9 months. The loss of the Meridian contract and the paper trail that showed whose decisions had caused it. The org chart changes that had repositioned B-Lol above functions I had previously controlled without consultation. The performance reviews, or the absence of them, that would have been required under normal employment practice before any compensation reduction could be justified. She said, "They have not followed their own contractual process." I said, "No." She said, "The recording captures an explicit statement that minimum wage is the proposed compensation for a role that your contract defines at a significantly higher level without a formal review process." I said, "Yes." She said, "And he explicitly stated that if you did not accept, you would be supported in transitioning out." I said, "Those were his words." She said, "That is constructive dismissal on tape." I said, "Yes." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want?" It was the right question, and I had been thinking about the answer since Thursday afternoon in the car with the audio file sent to 3 places. I said, "I want what the contract entitles me to. I want the wrongful treatment of the last 9 months properly acknowledged. And I want it done in a way that does not require me to spend years in a courtroom because I have a business to rebuild and I would like to spend my energy on that rather than on litigation." She said, "A settlement." I said, "A reasonable one. Documented. Clean." She said, "Given what is on that recording, I think reasonable is achievable." She began drafting the letter that afternoon. The letter went to Faisal Rahman on the Monday. I know the exact moment it arrived because I was told later that he called Sohail within 20 minutes of receiving it, which told me that Sohail was still in his confidence, which confirmed what I had suspected about the 8 months of information that had moved before the sale. The confirmation was useful. I added it to the documentation. Faisal called me on Tuesday. Not through his assistant. Directly, from his personal number, which was the first time he had called me directly in 9 months, which told me that the letter had produced the effect a letter like that is supposed to produce. He said, "Samira, I think there has been a misunderstanding." I said, "I have a lawyer now. I would prefer you contact her directly." He said, "I think we can resolve this between us." I said, "I would prefer you contact her directly." He said my name again with the tone of a man trying to re-establish the power dynamic of a conversation from which the power dynamic has departed. I said, "Her contact details are in the letter. I hope you have a good evening." I ended the call. I sat for a moment and I thought about the single room above the hardware store in 2009 and the laptop that took 4 minutes to start and the business plan written on weekends. I thought about 42 employees who came to work at something I had built. I thought about the Meridian contract and 6 years of relationship and a client who had called me personally because the relationship had always been with me. I thought about minimum wage. Then I went back to what I was working on, which was the business plan for the company I was going to build next. The settlement negotiation took 6 weeks. I will not detail every exchange because the details are between lawyers, and the lawyers handled them with the efficiency that good lawyers bring to situations where the evidence is clear and the other party's position is weak. What I will say is that the settlement covered the remainder of my contract at full salary, a separate sum that my lawyer described as appropriate given the documentation and the recording, and a clause that required Faisal Raymond's company to provide a written professional reference of a specific agreed standard. The reference clause was my idea. My lawyer thought it was a minor point. I told her it was not a minor point. The logistics industry is not large and reputation is the only currency that compounds, and I wanted a document that stated clearly and in writing that my 14 years at Karimi Logistics had been 14 years of building something real. She put it in. They signed it. I received the reference on a Wednesday morning and I read it in my car and it said everything it needed to say, and I put it in the same folder as the 47-minute recording and I drove to my next meeting. Sohail was let go 4 months after the settlement. I found this out through the industry network that I had spent 14 years building and that continued to function as a network regardless of what had happened at Karimi Logistics, because networks, like reputations, belong to the person who built them and not to the entity they built them inside. Someone who had worked at the company called me and mentioned it in passing, and I received the information and did not say anything about it. Bilal was still there as far as I knew. The business had lost 2 more contracts in the months after I left. I know this because clients called me. Not to discuss returning their business to a company I no longer had any connection to. To ask if I was doing anything new and to say they had valued working with me and hoped our paths would cross professionally again. I said, I'm working on something. I'll be in touch. I was working on something. I had been working on something since the Thursday afternoon in the car with the audio file sent to 3 places. The settlement had given me runway, and the reference had given me documentation, and the network had given me a foundation, and the 14 years had given me everything else. Sahar Freight Solutions registered as a company in March 2024. Not a single room above a hardware store this time. A proper office, small but real, with a desk I chose and a chair that was comfortable and a laptop that started immediately. 3 employees at launch, people I had worked with at various points in 14 years who I called and who said yes before I had finished explaining what I was building. The Meridian contract came back in May. The client called me directly, the same person who had called to say they were leaving Karimi Logistics with regret, and he said he had heard I was doing something new and he would like to have a conversation. We had the conversation. We signed a contract that was structured better than the one I had held before because I was building this one from a position of knowledge rather than from a position of a 26-year-old with a 4-minute laptop and a plan written on weekends. I'm not going to tell you the business is a success yet because it is 8 months old, and honesty requires acknowledging that 8 months is not 14 years and the 14 years took 14 years for a reason. What I will tell you is that it is moving in the right direction with the right people and the right contracts and the right foundation, which is the foundation of someone who has already built something once and knows which mistakes not to make the second time. The recording sits in a folder in my cloud storage. I have not deleted it. Not because I intend to use it for anything further. The settlement is concluded and the matter is closed. I have not deleted it because it is a document of a specific kind of clarity, the clarity of a Thursday afternoon in September when a man sat across from me in the office I had built and offered me minimum wage for 14 years of work and did not know that every word was being kept. I keep it the way you keep evidence of your own survival. Not to look at often. Just to know it is there. My lawyer Aisha called me last month to ask how the new business was going. We had developed the kind of relationship that sometimes forms between a lawyer and a client when the matter has been significant and has been handled well, a mutual professional respect. I told her it was going well and she said she was glad, and then she said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Of course." She said, "When did you know that you were going to record the meeting?" I said, 2 weeks before it happened. When I looked up the jurisdiction laws. She said, "And before that? When did you know what he was planning to do?" I thought about that. Then I said, when he put his son in the office in April. Maybe earlier. Maybe when he made the offer and used the phrase right continued leadership twice in the same conversation. I think I knew then that the phrase was doing more work than the thing it was describing. She said, "But you stayed." I said, "I stayed because I had 42 employees and I was not going to leave them inside a situation I had not yet fully understood. And because I needed time to build the documentation. And because leaving before the meeting would have left me with a grievance and no evidence and a contract that favored the employer." She said, "So you waited?" I said, "I waited and I worked and I kept my phone charged." She said, "That's a particular kind of patience." I said, 14 years teaches you particular kinds of patience." She laughed. Then she said, "Good luck with Sahar Freight." I said, "Thank you. I think we're going to be fine." I am writing this because there is a version of this story that I could have lived instead of the one I lived. The version where I walked out of that meeting and said nothing and accepted the situation, or left without documentation, or let the anger of it consume the energy I needed for what came next. I could have lived that version. The anger was available. The humiliation was available. The very specific devastation of being handed minimum wage for 14 years of work by a man sitting at a desk in an office you built is not a small thing, and I am not going to pretend it did not affect me. It affected me. It affected me in the car on the Thursday afternoon, and it affected me in the nights that followed, and it affected me in ways I processed privately and that were mine to process. But I had spent 14 years learning that the energy you spend on anger is energy you are not spending on solutions, and I had a solution. I had been building toward a solution for 2 weeks before the meeting happened, and the solution required the energy that the anger wanted, and I gave the energy to the solution instead. The phone was charged. The recording ran for 47 minutes. The letter went on Monday. And on a Thursday afternoon in September, a man made a quiet sound when he understood that the conversation he had been controlling had been keeping its own record. That sound is also on the recording. I have not deleted it. A man who thinks he can take 14 years of your work and hand you minimum wage has made a calculation about who you are. Make sure the calculation is wrong. Keep your phone charged. And let him talk.